Ah, the Fairly Oddparents, you gotta love it. Actually, no. Certain episodes make that an impossibility at times. And since some people think that seasons 9 and 10 are the worst things to happen since sliced bread, sometimes they need to be reminded that the show wasn't exactly perfect before that either. I often get asked what my least favorite episode of the Fairly Oddparents is anyway, so I think it necessitates going back and revisiting some episodes of the show and diving more into why they were good or bad. So here's a new series to keep your appetite at bay while I work on the Season 9 video. And since we haven't stolen enough from the Pie Guy formula, why not just call this, Fairly Odd Bits? No, there won't be a series called Fairly Odd Theories, don't ask. But anyway, take yourselves back to Season 6 for a moment. I mean, I was 7 years old back then, but let's remember the episodes from that season. They ranged from really good to really bad, but if you remember the Season 6 pie chart, you'll remember that only about half the Season 6 episodes were good, and only a select few were really good. But up to that point, the few bad episodes in Season 6 weren't the worst thing in the world. You had some pretty bad ones, but then every once in a while one would pop up like Wishy Washy that was almost okay. And then you remember this episode, Vicky Gets Fired. Currently, it is the worst episode of the Fairly Oddparents I've reviewed so far. And before the Season 9 video releases, I wanted all of you to know that in Seasons 1 through 8, I consider it the worst episode in that range. Obviously, the remaining seasons can still top that, but it's going to be a tall task. And from what I've seen from Seasons 9 and 10, a lot of the flaws in those episodes have more to do with storytelling blunders and things not making sense, rather than character implications being bad. As a result, this episode, I have a feeling, is going to be more anger-inducing than stupid, like I expect a lot of bad episodes going forward to be. But to refresh everyone on my thoughts, here's what I said in the original review. Episode 92A. Vicky Gets Fired. Vicky gets fired, so in search of a new job, she becomes mayor of Dimsdale. Wow. I am speechless. I really thought Wishy Washy was terrible, but this episode gives it some stiff competition. Seriously, let's start with the small problem with the episode, and I can't even believe I'm calling this the small problem because it's an oversight that should have gotten the episode shelved at the concept stage. So there's this reality TV contest Timmy's parents try to enter, so they set up cameras around the house and try to record everything. Wanda suggests that Timmy should show his parents the footage of all the awful things Vicky does to him. Wanda says this while standing in front of the camera. Timmy's parents will see Cosmo and Wanda if he shows them this footage. Like, come on, you had to know that would cause some kind of problem. The catalyst for why the episode is even happening is a plot hole. I can't believe it. Well, actually, what's even less believable is that this is the least of the problems in the episode. Timmy's parents go back to not caring about him when they watch the footage, as the only thing they care about is that Vicky taped over the episodes and not all the deranged things he goes through. In that regard, they took one step forward and 2 steps back. And then the conflict of the episode is that there's not a single job Vicky can have that doesn't result in her ruling over Earth as some kind of deranged dictator. So the conflict resolution is that Timmy is basically forced to suck it up and keep taking this abuse. You don't have to talk about how terrible that is, right?
It's a bad episode.
Poorly conceived, and from start to finish there were loads of problems. You know the Gumball episode, The Job? Yeah, well this is that episode if it were terrible. I respect my lack of restraint when originally reviewing this episode. If there's any episode that deserves a lack of restraint, it's this one. You know, maybe I was even too nice when reviewing this episode. From start to finish, they're throwing things at you that do not work. The first scene of the episode is about Timmy's parents trying to document their lives reality show style, and that's a neat concept, but the direction they take it in is so unfortunate. It's unfortunate not because it's a bad idea, but because the entire point of what they're doing is to set up Timmy being miserable. Now, Timmy being miserable isn't bad in and of itself, but with the way this episode's conflict is set up, it causes problems. Since the episode's conflict is resolved by making things worse for Timmy when they were already set up to be bad, it feels like no resolution actually happens, since the actual resolution keeps things bad for Timmy, our protagonist. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want you to look at this frame and tell me what you see. What's that? A camera? At this point, I think you might be able to tell what's wrong with this. I mean, the whole reason Timmy even gets excited in this scene is because his parents will now see the awful things Vicky does to him. But really, think about why that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I can think of 2 reasons. Seriously, this scene kickstarts the plot, and it's a plot hole. Why would Timmy show his parents evidence of his fairies which will get them taken away? Magically, this doesn't happen because the people that made this episode were half asleep during production, seemingly. But doesn't that concern you just a little bit that this isn't even the worst thing about this episode? How can you be so inept as to make an episode where a plot originating from a plot hole isn't even its worst flaw?
We trusted you with something we hold very dear, the most important thing in our lives, and you erased it!
And it turns out that we can't even get the slightest bit of satisfaction by having Timmy's parents at least fire Vicky for a valid reason. Like, I get that Timmy's parents were supposed to be morons, but even they weren't originally conceived to be this stupid. Which brings us to the second half and the escalation part of the episode. In the original review, I said, you know the Gumball episode, The Job? Yeah, well this is that episode if it were terrible. For those that don't know, in that episode they play with the trope of the stupid dad that's been done to death for decades, and they actually give an in-universe reason for why Richard can't get a job. Because it's shown that the fact that he has a job is the reason why the universe is pretty much self-destructing. It's humorous plot resolution in a creative way, subverting tropes that makes Gumball such a great show, and one of my favorites from Cartoon Network. In Vicky Gets Fired, they try to do something very similar, albeit 4 years earlier. The escalation in this episode is that when Vicky becomes mayor, she becomes an evil dictator, and when she's not mayor, then she becomes an even more powerful evil dictator, and so on. That's why the episode is so insulting, because Timmy solves this problem by wishing everything back to normal. But because normal is an abusive situation for Timmy, the lesson Timmy learns at the end of the episode is that he should suck it up and take the abuse, because it's his best case scenario. It's an origami folding of the lesson he learns in It's a Wishful Life, which is that, as he's wishing himself back into existence, he's knowingly making everybody else's life worse. So him not existing in that episode is the best case scenario for everyone else, and it's just an episode full of bad feelings. But why I think Vicky Gets Fired is worse is that Timmy's abuse is shown to be the life purpose of Vicky, in a way that's just uncomfortable. And because his parents are also shown to not even care, it makes me wonder why they consider the conflict solved by returning to the status quo. Even if things are back to the status quo by the next episode, you still need to show us that something has changed by the end of the story for it to be satisfying to the viewers. They didn't do that, and this is how it turned out. Seasons 9 and 10 might end up being worse seasons than Season 6, but I have a hard time believing they can churn out a worse episode than this. You'll just have to watch them to see.